Mother Bear. Electrocuted by power lines. A baby's crayon drawing. Stop the utility company. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of maple trees and whispering pines, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Olivia Reed sat on her porch rocking chair, cradling her 14-month-old daughter Mia, whose chubby fingers reached for the floating dust particles dancing in the sunbeams. Their little cottage stood at the edge of the woods, the last house on Meadow Lane, where civilization and wilderness shared an uneasy border marked by rusting power lines that sagged too low between weathered poles. "Look, sweetie," Olivia whispered, pointing toward the tree line where wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze. "Do you see the butterflies?" Mia babbled excitedly, her wide eyes following her mother's gesture. What caught her attention wasn't the butterflies, but something much larger moving between the trees. A mother bear and her tiny cub, cautiously making their way along the forest's edge. The bears had become frequent visitors over the past few weeks, keeping a respectful distance from the cottage, but close enough for Olivia and Mia to observe their gentle foraging. "There's Mama Bear again," Olivia murmured, instinctively holding Mia closer, "and little baby bear, just like in your storybook." The mother bear's coat gleamed rich brown in the morning light as she showed her cub how to overturn rocks for insects and dig for roots. The pair moved with a tender grace that belied their wild nature, the mother constantly checking on her cub with nudges and quiet grunts. Mia waved her tiny hand at them, as if greeting old friends. Dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, rolling in faster than the weather report had predicted. The air grew heavy with the scent of rain, and a distant rumble of thunder made the cub press closer to its mother. Olivia rose from her chair, gathering Mia's toys scattered across the porch. "Storm's coming, baby girl. Time to go inside." As they retreated into the safety of their cottage, the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly transforming into a torrential downpour. Through the kitchen window, Olivia watched the mother bear hurrying her cub toward a cluster of dense pines for shelter, their forms growing indistinct in the curtain of rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sagging power lines that crossed the bear's path, now slick with rain and swaying dangerously in the intensifying wind. Olivia turned away to put on the kettle, settling Mia in her high chair with a colorful array of crayons and paper, the baby's favorite rainy day activity. Mia immediately grabbed a brown crayon, her tiny fist gripping it with surprising determination as she made circular motions across the paper. A blinding flash lit up the kitchen, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. But something else accompanied that thunderclap, a sound so foreign yet unmistakably horrific that Olivia froze, the kettle suspended above the stove. It was a roar of pain, primal and agonizing, that cut through the storm's fury like a knife. Mia stopped drawing, her brown crayon falling from her fingers as she stared wide-eyed at the window. Another sound followed, a series of pitiful whimpers that made Olivia's heart clench. She placed the kettle down with trembling hands and moved cautiously to the window, peering out through the rain-streaked glass. Through the downpour, she could make out a large, dark shape crumpled beneath the power lines. Beside it, a smaller form paced in frantic circles, those heart-wrenching whimpers growing more desperate by the second. A fallen power line sparked dangerously close to the larger shape, illuminating for just an instant the mother bear's still form, her wet fur smoking slightly in the rain. "Oh no," Olivia whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God, no." Behind her, Mia began to wail, as if she somehow understood the tragedy unfolding before them. The baby's cries mingled with the cub's pitiful whimpers, creating a chorus of grief that seemed to rise above the storm itself. Olivia stood frozen, torn between the maternal instinct to comfort her child and the horrifying realization that another mother lay dying just beyond her window, leaving a baby as helpless and frightened as her own. In her high chair, Mia's wails subsided into hiccuping sobs. She reached again for her crayons, this time grabbing both the brown and a vivid red. With surprising purpose for one so young, she began making jagged lines across her paper, punctuated by circular shapes that bore an uncanny resemblance to the tragedy playing out beyond their walls. The storm raged on, but in that quiet kitchen, something profound was taking shape beneath a baby's innocent hands, something that would soon challenge the indifference of those responsible for the tragedy and change the fate of the forest's grieving residents forever. The rain continued to hammer against the cottage throughout the night, but by morning the storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind a world washed clean and eerily quiet. Olivia had barely slept, her mind replaying the horrific scene from the previous evening. She'd made a dozen phone calls to the utility company's emergency line where a disinterested operator had logged her report with a promise that someone would look into it, to the local wildlife authority who claimed they couldn't send anyone until the power company declared the area safe, and finally to her neighbors, spreading the word about the tragedy. Mia had eventually fallen asleep clutching her crayon drawing, now a chaotic tangle of brown, red, black, and yellow, colors that somehow captured the essence of yesterday's horror with an intuition that seemed impossible for a 14-month-old. When Olivia stepped onto her porch in the pale morning light, coffee mug clutched in her trembling hands, she was surprised to find 3 of her neighbors already gathered at the edge of her property, gazing solemnly toward the forest line. "I came as soon as I heard," said Ellis Morgan, the retired high school science teacher who lived 2 houses down. His weathered face was grave as he adjusted his glasses. "Is it still—" "I don't know," Olivia admitted, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "I was afraid to look." Sarah Blackwood, who ran the local bakery, placed a gentle hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Jack's gone to check. He brought some blankets just in case." Jack Chen, Sarah's husband and the town's only veterinarian, was carefully making his way toward the power lines, a bundle of blankets tucked under one arm and a medical bag in the other. He stopped several yards from the fallen bear, scanning the area for the loose power line. "It's not sparking anymore," he called back. "I think the power's been cut." The small group watched in tense silence as Jack approached the bear's massive form. The mother bear lay motionless, her fur singed and wet from the rain. Beside her, the exhausted cub had finally collapsed into sleep, curled against its mother's side in a heartbreaking display of trust and devotion. Jack knelt beside them, placing his fingers against the mother bear's neck in a practiced motion. After what seemed an eternity, he looked up, his expression unreadable in the distance. "She's alive," he called, his voice tight with restrained emotion. "But barely. She's in shock, severely burned, and I don't know if she'll make it without specialized care." A collective exhale of relief mingled with renewed concern swept through the small gathering. Inside the cottage, Mia began to cry, awakened from her nap by voices outside. Olivia rushed back inside to fetch her daughter, returning moments later with Mia on her hip, the baby's eyes still puffy from sleep. "What about the little one?" Olivia called to Jack, who was now examining the cub with gentle hands. "Physically fine, as far as I can tell," Jack replied, "but terrified and severely dehydrated. We need to get them both to a wildlife rehabilitation center immediately." Ellis pulled out his cell phone. I'll call Nathan. His logging truck could transport them safely. As if summoned by the unfolding drama, more neighbors began to arrive. First as a trickle, then a steady stream. Within an hour, nearly 30 people stood in Olivia's yard, an impromptu community gathering united by concern for the forest's wounded residents. Amidst the growing crowd, a black SUV with the Northern Electric Power Company logo pulled up, and two men in identical blue uniforms stepped out. The taller one, whose badge identified him as Raymond Phillips, approached with the practiced smile of a corporate representative. "Ma'am," he addressed Olivia, tipping his hard hat slightly, "we received a report about downed power lines in this area." "Yes," Olivia replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "They electrocuted a bear last night. She's still alive, but barely." Raymond's smile didn't waver, though his eyes flicked momentarily toward the gathering crowd. "That's unfortunate, but wild animals and power infrastructure don't mix well. These things happen." A murmur of discontent rippled through the assembled neighbors. Jack Chen stood up from where he'd been monitoring the bear's vital signs, his face flushed with anger. "These things happen when power lines aren't maintained properly," he said, his normally calm voice rising. "Those lines have been sagging for years. I filed a complaint myself last summer when a branch caught on one during a windstorm and nearly started a fire. Raymond's partner, a younger man who hadn't introduced himself, was already examining the fallen power line with a testing device. 'Line's clear now,' he called. 'We can remove the damaged section and restore power to the grid this afternoon.'" "And that's it?" Sarah Blackwood stepped forward, hands on her hips. "What about fixing the lines properly so this doesn't happen again? What about helping with the bear and her cub?" Raymond's professional demeanor chilled several degrees. "Ma'am, Northern Electric is not responsible for wildlife management. We'll repair the infrastructure according to company protocols, but I'm afraid the bears are not our concern." A fresh wave of muttering swept through the crowd, louder this time. Olivia felt a hot surge of anger rising in her chest. In her arms, Mia began to squirm, reaching toward the ground with insistent little hands. "Down, Mama," she demanded, a rare, full phrase from the normally quiet baby. Distracted by the confrontation unfolding before her, Olivia set Mia down on the porch steps, keeping one eye on her daughter while she joined the heated discussion. No one noticed as Mia, with surprising determination, toddled down the steps and across the wet grass, clutching her crumpled drawing in one tiny fist. The argument between the neighbors and the power company representatives grew more intense. Ellis Morgan was citing safety regulations, while Jack urgently explained that the mother bear needed immediate professional medical attention. Raymond maintained his corporate stance, occasionally consulting a tablet where he referenced company policies with infuriating calm. It was Sarah who first noticed Mia's approach. "Olivia," she said quietly, nodding toward the toddler who had somehow managed to reach the edge of the gathered adults unnoticed. Olivia turned, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw how far Mia had wandered. But before she could rush to retrieve her daughter, something extraordinary happened. Something that would later be recounted in hushed, reverent tones throughout Whispering Pines for years to come. Little Mia, with the solemn purpose that only the very young can muster, walked directly up to Raymond Phillips. She stopped before him, her chubby legs planted firmly on the ground, and held up her crumpled drawing. Her tiny face was set in an expression of such serious intent that Raymond automatically bent down to her level. "Bear hurt," Mia said clearly, pointing first to the chaotic tangle of brown and red on her paper, then toward the fallen mother bear in the distance. "Fix." The simple command, delivered with such absolute conviction, created a moment of profound silence. Raymond stared at the child's drawing, then at the child herself, his professional mask slipping for the first time. In the jagged red lines crossed with black, in the brown circles surrounded by yellow lightning bolts, he seemed to see something that bypassed all his corporate training and touched something fundamental within him. Mia pressed the drawing against his chest, her eyes never leaving his face. "Fix bear," she repeated, a quiver entering her voice. "Please." Raymond swallowed hard, taking the drawing with unsteady hands. For a long moment, he looked at the paper, then at the injured bear, then back to the tiny human demanding justice with the purest, most unassailable moral clarity. "Nathan's here with the truck," Alice called, breaking the spell as a large logging vehicle rumbled up the narrow lane. Raymond straightened, clearing his throat. He carefully folded Mia's drawing and placed it in his breast pocket. "I'll need to make some calls," he said, his voice noticeably altered, "and get some equipment out here." His younger colleague looked confused. "But the standard protocol will need to be adjusted in this case," Raymond cut him off, already pulling out his phone. "Get me the number for Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. And call headquarters. Tell them we need the line maintenance crew out here immediately with new poles." As Nathan's truck was carefully positioned to transport the injured bear, Raymond stepped away from the crowd, speaking urgently into his phone. No one could hear the full conversation, but fragments drifted back. Words like corporate responsibility and community relations, and most surprisingly, the right thing to do. Olivia scooped Mia up, covering her daughter's face with grateful kisses. "You amazing, wonderful girl," she whispered, though she couldn't quite articulate, even to herself, what exactly had just happened. What none of them could have predicted was how this small moment, a baby's crayon drawing, changing the heart of a corporate representative, was merely the first ripple in what would become a wave of transformation for Whispering Pines, the power company, and the fragile balance between human development and the natural world. Meanwhile, as the mother bear was gently loaded onto Nathan's truck, her cub watching with anxious eyes from a carrying crate, a mysterious figure observed from the shadow of the trees. Dressed in worn hiking clothes, a camera with a telephoto lens hanging around his neck, the stranger documented the entire scene with silent intensity. When the truck pulled away and the crowd began to disperse, he melted back into the forest. A ghost whose presence would soon catalyze the next unexpected twist in the unfolding drama. By late afternoon, Jack Chen's small veterinary clinic had become an impromptu command center. The mother bear couldn't be safely transported to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center until she was stabilized, so Jack had cleared his schedule and converted his largest examination room into an emergency treatment area for the massive animal. "Her vital signs are improving," he reported to the small group gathered in his waiting room. Olivia and Mia, Alice, Sarah, and surprisingly, Raymond Phillips, who had remained at the scene long after his colleague had departed with the repair crew. "But those burns are severe, and there's neurological damage from the electric shock. She'll need specialized care beyond what I can provide." Raymond nodded, his earlier corporate demeanor replaced by genuine concern. He still carried Mia's drawing in his pocket, occasionally touching it as if to remind himself of something important. "The Wildlife Center is sending their veterinary team. They should be here within the hour." "What about the cub?" Olivia asked, bouncing Mia gently on her knee. The baby had been unusually quiet since their arrival at the clinic, her wide eyes taking in everything with solemn attention. "Physically healthy but distressed," Jack replied. "Cubs this young are entirely dependent on their mothers." Separation is traumatic. A soft knock at the clinic's front door interrupted their conversation. Sarah, positioned closest to the entrance, rose to answer it. The man who stood on the threshold was tall and weathered, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a ponytail and intense eyes that scanned the room with quiet assessment. A camera hung around his neck, and a worn leather messenger bag was slung across his shoulder. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, her tone cautious. "My name is Daniel Wakefield," the man said, his voice unexpectedly soft for his rugged appearance. "I'm a photojournalist with Environmental Truth Quarterly. I was documenting the impact of development on forest habitats when I witnessed what happened this morning." Ellis stepped forward, his teacher's instinct for verification immediately engaged. "Environmental Truth? Never heard of it." Daniel's smile was slight but genuine. "We're small but dedicated. Focus on the intersection of corporate activities and environmental consequences." His gaze settled on Raymond, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Northern Electric, right? I got some very interesting photographs of your power lines today." Raymond stiffened visibly, his hand moving instinctively to his pocket where Mia's drawing rested. "The company is already addressing the situation." "So I saw," Daniel replied, setting his bag down and pulling out a tablet. "But this isn't an isolated incident, is it?" He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to display a map dotted with red markers. "These are all locations where Northern Electric infrastructure has caused wildlife injuries or habitat damage in the past 3 years. Most never reported beyond local authorities." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Raymond's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Daniel continued, his tone shifting from accusation to something more thoughtful. "What interested me today wasn't just another corporate negligence story," he said, pulling up a series of photographs on his tablet. "It was witnessing something I've never seen before." He displayed the first image, a perfect capture of the moment Mia had approached Raymond with her drawing, her tiny face upturned with absolute conviction, Raymond bending to meet her at eye level. "This," Daniel said quietly, "is the most powerful environmental advocacy I've ever documented." Olivia gasped softly, tightening her hold on Mia. "You were photographing my daughter without permission?" Daniel's expression turned apologetic. "I understand your concern. Public event, public space, but I should have approached you first, and I apologize." He turned to face Olivia directly. "What your daughter did today was extraordinary. She cut through politics, corporate policy, and adult justifications with pure, simple truth. And it worked." He scrolled to another image. Raymond carefully folding the drawing and placing it in his pocket, his face transformed by something that looked remarkably like revelation. "I've spent 15 years documenting environmental conflicts," Daniel continued. "Endless debates, protests, legal battles, all important, but all complicated by adult concerns, politics, economics. Then this child with crayon and paper achieves what armies of lawyers and activists often fail to do. She makes someone see." The clinic fell silent again, the weight of his words settling over them. Raymond looked down at his hands, conflict evident in his expression. Mia, as if sensing she was the subject of discussion, pointed at Daniel's camera. "Bear picture," she said clearly. Daniel nodded solemnly. "Yes, I have pictures of the bear too. Would you like to see?" After a hesitant nod from Olivia, Daniel knelt down and showed Mia a photograph of the mother bear being treated by Jack, careful to select an image that wasn't too graphic or frightening. "Bear get better?" Mia asked, her finger gently touching the screen. "I hope so," Daniel replied with surprising gentleness. "And I think your drawing is helping." Raymond cleared his throat. "What exactly do you plan to do with these photographs, Mr. Wakefield?" Daniel stood, meeting Raymond's gaze directly. "That depends partly on you. This could be another exposé on corporate negligence." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Or it could be something more constructive. A story about transformation, about a company learning to balance progress with protection." Before Raymond could respond, the clinic door opened again, and a team in wilderness management uniforms entered, bringing with them specialized equipment for transporting an injured bear. As Jack led them back to the examination room, Daniel quietly packed away his tablet. "I'll be in town for a few days," he said, handing Raymond a business card. "Northern Electric has an opportunity here. Not just to fix a few sagging power lines, but to become a model for responsible infrastructure management in delicate ecosystems." He turned to Olivia, offering her a different card. "If you're comfortable with the idea, I'd like to talk more about what happened today, with proper permissions, of course." As Daniel departed, his appearance having added yet another layer of complexity to the already extraordinary day, no one noticed that his camera bag had been left slightly open. Inside, a small digital recorder continued to capture every word spoken in the clinic's waiting room. That evening, as specialized wildlife veterinarians worked to stabilize the mother bear for transport, an anonymous article appeared on the Environmental Truth website, accompanied by the striking photograph of Mia holding up her crayon drawing to Raymond. The headline read, "A Child's Drawing, the Moment Corporate America Faced Its Conscience." Within hours, the story had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms. By midnight, it had been picked up by several national news outlets. Alongside the article, Daniel had included a QR code linking to a petition demanding Northern Electric conduct a comprehensive safety review of all their rural infrastructure with potential wildlife impact. In her crib, Mia slept peacefully, unaware that her simple act of compassion was spreading across the digital landscape like wildfire, touching hearts and igniting action far beyond the boundaries of whispering pines. Under her pillow, a fresh sheet of paper waited for morning, when new colors would tell the next chapter of her unexpected connection to the forest and its vulnerable inhabitants. Meanwhile, in a downtown hotel room, Daniel Wakefield uploaded the final pieces of his investigation: audio recordings, additional photographs, and documents obtained through years of research, to a secure server. His finger hovered over the publish button as he considered the potential consequences. This went far beyond one injured bear or one town's power lines. The evidence he had compiled suggested a pattern of cost-cutting measures across Northern Electric's entire operational area, with environmental consequences that had been systematically minimized or concealed. He thought of Mia's simple, powerful demand: "Fix bear." Sometimes, he reflected, the most profound truths came from the most innocent sources. With renewed resolve, he pressed publish, setting in motion events that would reach far beyond anything he had initially imagined, and creating powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to discredit both his findings and the unexpected symbol of resistance: a baby's crayon drawing. By dawn, the story had exploded. National morning shows led with the image of Mia and her drawing, juxtaposed against photos of the injured bear being treated. Social media platforms were flooded with discussions, the hashtag #FixBear trending nationwide. Northern Electric's stock had dropped 7 points in pre-market trading, and their public relations department was in crisis mode. Olivia awoke to her phone ringing incessantly. Calls from news organizations, environmental groups, and neighbors warning her that reporters were already gathering at the edge of her property. She peeked through her curtains, dismayed to see several news vans parked along Meadow Lane. "What have we gotten ourselves into, Mia?" she whispered to her daughter, who was happily scribbling with crayons in her crib, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. A firm knock at the back door startled her. Cautiously approaching, Olivia was relieved to see Sarah Blackwood's familiar face through the window. She quickly let her neighbor in. "It's a circus out there," Sarah said, setting down a basket of fresh muffins on the kitchen counter. "Jack sent me to check on you two. We figured you might need reinforcements." "I don't understand how this happened so quickly," Olivia said, running a hand through her uncombed hair. "We were just trying to help the bear." Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Olivia the viral article. Daniel Wakefield is apparently quite influential in environmental journalism circles, and Mia... She glanced at the happily babbling toddler. "Well, she's become something of a symbol." As they talked, another knock came at the back door. Ellis, this time, accompanied by Raymond Phillips. The Northern Electric representative looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept at all. "Ms. Reed," Raymond said formally once they were seated in Olivia's small living room, "I need to speak with you about the current situation." Ellis crossed his arms. "I'm staying for this conversation." Raymond nodded wearily. "That's fine. I'm not here officially." He pulled out Mia's drawing, now carefully preserved in a clear plastic sleeve. "I wanted to return this and to apologize." "Apologize?" Olivia asked, surprised. "The power lines should have been maintained properly. Your report about the injured bear should have triggered an immediate emergency response, not a standard maintenance call." He took a deep breath. "But more than that, I need to warn you about what's coming." The serious tone in his voice caused everyone to lean forward. Even Mia, playing on her blanket nearby, seemed to pause and listen. "The article, the one with your daughter's photo, has created a significant problem for Northern Electric. Our CEO, Vincent Hargrove, is not pleased. There's an emergency board meeting this morning, and I've been called in to explain the situation." "You could lose your job," Sarah realized aloud. Raymond gave a mirthless laugh. "That's the least of it. Wakefield's follow-up publications include internal documents suggesting systemic safety violations across our rural infrastructure. The company is already preparing to discredit him and, by extension," he glanced meaningfully at Mia. "They would attack a child?" Ellis asked incredulously. "Not directly," Raymond clarified. "But I've seen the preliminary PR strategy. They'll suggest the whole thing was staged for media attention, point out that children Mia's age don't have the cognitive development to understand what they're drawing, imply that perhaps she was coached." Olivia felt sick. "That's disgusting." "It is," Raymond agreed, "which is why I'm here. I can't be part of it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "This contains maintenance records for all Northern Electric infrastructure within 50 miles of Whispering Pines. It shows clear evidence that the company has repeatedly delayed required maintenance in rural areas to prioritize more profitable urban upgrades." Ellis stared at the USB drive. "You're whistleblowing." "I've been with the company for 17 years, Raymond said quietly. "I've looked the other way too many times, justified too many business decisions that I knew weren't right. Yesterday, your daughter," he nodded toward Mia, "made me see everything differently, so simply, so clearly." Outside, the number of vehicles along Meadow Lane was growing. A helicopter thudded overhead, presumably carrying a news team getting aerial footage. "What about the bear and her cub?" Olivia asked. "Did they make it to the Wildlife Center?" Raymond nodded. "They were transported successfully last night. The mother bear is in critical but stable condition. The center has agreed to provide regular updates." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The land where the power lines cross, it's been designated for a new substation development. Construction was scheduled to begin next month, which would have destroyed that section of forest habitat completely. So, maintaining those lines properly wasn't a priority because they were going to be replaced anyway, Ellis concluded, his expression darkening. Exactly, but now, with all this attention, Raymond gestured vaguely toward the windows where camera crews could be seen setting up equipment. A new knock at the back door interrupted them. This time, it was Jack Chen, accompanied by a woman none of them recognized. Tall, elegantly dressed in a tailored suit, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as she entered the room. "This is Christine Lawson," Jack introduced her. "She's an environmental attorney I know from college. Given what's happening, I thought we might need her expertise." Christine surveyed the room quickly, her gaze lingering on Raymond. "Mr. Phillips, interesting to find you here." "You know each other?" Sarah asked. "We've been on opposite sides of a few legal matters," Christine replied with a tight smile. "Though I'm curious which side he's on today." Raymond held up the USB drive. "I think this answers that question." Christine's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed, it does." She turned to Olivia. "Ms. Reed, I understand your daughter has become an unwitting catalyst in what's rapidly evolving into a major environmental case. If you're willing, I'd like to offer my services to protect both of you from what's likely coming." "Which is what, exactly?" Olivia asked, her arms instinctively moving to gather Mia close. "Northern Electric has significant political and economic influence. They won't simply accept this level of negative publicity without fighting back." Christine's expression softened as she looked at Mia. "They'll try to change the narrative, possibly in ways that could be distressing for both of you." While the adults discussed legal strategies and potential media responses, Mia wriggled free from her mother's arms and returned to her crayons. With focused determination, she began a new drawing, this one featuring jagged yellow lines surrounded by trees, with brown shapes that might have been bears safely distant from the dangerous electricity. Outside the cottage, unnoticed by those within, a sleek black car pulled up behind the news vans. Two men in expensive suits emerged, surveying the scene with calculating eyes. One spoke quietly into a phone. "We've located Phillips," proceeding as instructed. In the forest beyond Olivia's property, another drama was unfolding. Daniel Wakefield, who had returned to document the power line site in morning light, found himself being followed by a drone that hovered just at the edge of his awareness, recording his every move. When he attempted to photograph it, it ascended rapidly beyond sight. Deeper in the woods, where few humans ever ventured, something extraordinary was happening. Word of the injured mother bear had spread through the animal community in ways humans couldn't comprehend. Creatures of all kinds, deer, foxes, raccoons, birds, had gathered at the boundary where forest met civilization, a silent vigil that seemed to pulse with shared awareness. Among them, watching the human activity with ancient, knowing eyes, stood a massive male bear, the largest seen in these woods for generations. Whether he had a connection to the injured mother bear, no human could say, but his presence altered the forest's energy, creating an atmosphere of expectant waiting. The strands of fate were drawing tighter. Corporate power, environmental activism, legal battles, media frenzy, and at the center of it all, a baby's crayon drawing and the primal, unbreakable bond between a mother and child, whether human or bear. What had begun as a simple tragedy was evolving into something far more complex and far-reaching, with consequences that would test the boundaries between wilderness and civilization, power and vulnerability, corruption and redemption. In her high chair, Mia continued drawing, adding a new element to her picture, a small human figure standing protectively between the bears and the dangerous power lines. With each crayon stroke, she seemed to be creating not just an image, but a vision of a world where such protection was possible, where the smallest voice could indeed change the course of events far larger than itself. The midday sun beat down on whispering pines, casting harsh shadows across the growing media encampment outside Olivia's cottage. Inside, Christine Lawson had transformed the kitchen table into a makeshift legal command center, her laptop surrounded by hastily scrawled notes and printouts of relevant environmental regulations. Northern Electric has issued their official statement, Ellis reported, his tablet displaying the company's website. They're expressing deep concern for wildlife affected by their infrastructure and announcing a comprehensive safety review of all rural power lines. Christine's expression remained skeptical. Classic damage control. Note they're not actually admitting fault or committing to specific changes. Raymond, who had been on his phone in the corner of the room, rejoined the group, his face grim. I've been terminated, effective immediately. Violation of confidentiality agreements and conduct unbecoming a company representative. Were you expecting anything different? Jack asked kindly. No, Raymond admitted, but it still stings after 17 years. He glanced at Mia, who was napping peacefully on the living room sofa. Worth it, though. A soft knock at the back door announced Sarah's return from her reconnaissance mission to town. It's not just reporters out there anymore, she reported breathlessly. There are protesters gathering in the town square, environmental groups, student activists. Someone's erected a giant poster of Mia's drawing, and Northern Electric has sent a team to reroute the power lines. They're working at triple speed. Of course they are, Christine muttered. Optics. Olivia, who had been unusually quiet throughout these discussions, finally spoke up. I appreciate everything you're all doing, but I need to think about what's best for Mia. She's not even 2 years old. I never wanted her to become some kind of symbol in a corporate environmental war. Christine's expression softened. I understand completely. My priority is protecting both of you, your privacy, your safety, your right to simply live your lives. Which may be more complicated than we thought, Ellis said, peering out the window with sudden concern. That doesn't look like another news van. Everyone turned to look. A black SUV with tinted windows had pushed past the media vehicles and was making its way slowly up Olivia's driveway. Northern Electric Executive Security, Raymond identified immediately, his posture tensing. Vincent Hargrove doesn't trust regular security for sensitive matters. What would they want here? Sarah asked, alarm evident in her voice. Raymond held up the USB drive. This, most likely, and damage control they can control. Christine moved with decisive efficiency, inserting the drive into her laptop and rapidly copying its contents to an encrypted cloud storage. We need multiple backups, now. They can't just barge in here, can they? Olivia asked, moving instinctively toward her sleeping daughter. Legally, no, Christine confirmed. But I've dealt with Hargrove before. Legal niceties don't always factor into his approach. The SUV stopped. 2 men in suits that barely concealed their athletic builds emerged, surveying the property with practiced efficiency. Back door, Raymond decided quickly. Jack, is your clinic van still parked behind the house? Jack nodded. Keys are in my pocket. We need to move, Raymond continued. If they're here for what I think they're here for, this could get unpleasant. Olivia was already gathering Mia, who whimpered softly as she was lifted from her nap. Where would we go? The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Jack suggested. It's secure, remote, and they've already restricted access because of media interest in the Bears. Christine finished her digital backup and shut down her laptop. Good thinking. I'll drive my own car and meet you there. If they follow, we'll have legal witnesses to harassment. Moving with quiet urgency, they gathered only the essentials: Olivia's purse, Mia's diaper bag, Christine's laptop, and Raymond's USB drive, now safely duplicated. As they slipped out the back door, they could hear a firm knocking at the front, followed by an authoritative voice calling for Ms. Reed. Jack's veterinary van was modestly marked with his clinic's logo, Whispering Pines Animal Care, in simple green lettering on white. It was large enough to accommodate them all, with Olivia holding Mia in the passenger seat, Raymond, Ellis, and Sarah crowded in the back among medical supplies. "Stay low," Jack advised as he started the engine. "We'll take the back service road through the woods. It connects to the highway eventually." As they pulled away, Raymond glanced back to see the two security men circling the house, one speaking urgently into a wrist microphone. There was no immediate pursuit, but the tension in the van remained palpable. "I'm sorry about this," Olivia said, cradling Mia's drowsy form against her chest. "You're all risking so much because of us." "Not because of you," Ellis corrected gently. "Because it's the right thing to do, just like Mia showed us." The van bounced along the rough service road, ancient trees forming a protective canopy overhead. Jack drove with focused concentration, navigating the challenging terrain with the skill of someone who had made this journey many times to reach injured wildlife. "Something's not right," Sarah said suddenly, peering through the rear windows. "Look at the animals." All along the roadside, wildlife had gathered in unusual numbers and combinations: deer standing alert beside foxes, raccoons perched on low branches alongside birds of various species. None fled as the van passed, instead watching with an almost sentient awareness. "It's like they know," Jack murmured, slowing slightly to avoid startling a group of rabbits that made no move to scatter from the road. "Like they're aware of what's happening." In Olivia's arms, Mia had fully awakened. She pointed excitedly at the assembled creatures. "Animals helping," she declared with absolute certainty. The moment of wonder was shattered by the distant sound of an engine behind them, powerful and gaining rapidly. "They found the road," Raymond confirmed grimly, twisting to look through the rear window. "Black SUV, same model as before." Jack accelerated as much as the rough road would allow. "We're still 10 minutes from the highway. They'll catch us before then." "Can we call for help?" Sarah suggested, already pulling out her phone. No signal, she realized with dismay. The pursuing vehicle was gaining steadily, now visible in Jack's rearview mirror. The van, designed for animal transport rather than speed, was no match for the powerful SUV. There, Ellis pointed suddenly to a narrow turnoff almost hidden by overhanging branches. "That old logging path, they might not spot it if we're quick." Jack made a sharp turn, branches scraping along the sides of the van as they plunged deeper into the forest on a path barely wide enough for their vehicle. The undergrowth grew thicker, the canopy denser, until they were driving through a green tunnel that seemed to swallow them into the heart of the wilderness. The sound of pursuit faded briefly, then returned as the SUV discovered their diversion. "End of the road," Jack announced tensely as they approached a clearing where the path terminated at what appeared to be an abandoned ranger station, a small, weathered cabin with boarded windows and a sagging porch. "We can't outrun them, but we can outthink them," Raymond decided, already forming a plan. "Inside, quickly!" They rushed into the abandoned ranger station, dust and cobwebs greeting them as Jack pushed the creaking door shut behind them. The interior was sparse, a few broken chairs, a desk with a faded map of the forest spread across it, and windows too dirty to see through clearly. "They'll be here any minute," Sarah whispered, peering through a crack in the boarded window. 2 men, both armed. Olivia clutched Mia tighter, the baby unusually quiet, as if sensing the gravity of their situation. What do they want? This is insane. All because of a power line and an injured bear? "It's not about the bear anymore," Christine said grimly, having arrived just behind them in her own vehicle. "It's about what Raymond's evidence reveals: systemic neglect, cover-ups, possibly even corruption reaching into regulatory agencies. There are millions of dollars at stake, maybe more." Outside, the SUV's engine went silent. Car doors slammed. "Back door?" Ellis suggested urgently. Jack shook his head. "Collapsed years ago. This place has been abandoned since the budget cuts." Mia suddenly squirmed in Olivia's arms, pointing insistently toward the dirty window. "Bears," she said clearly. Everyone froze, exchanging confused glances until Raymond cautiously approached the window and wiped a small section clean with his sleeve. What he saw made him step back in astonishment. "She's right," he whispered. "Bears. A lot of them." The others crowded around different windows, clearing small viewing spaces. Surrounding the cabin in a loose semicircle were animals. Not just the bears Mia had identified, but deer, foxes, raccoons, and birds perched in branches. Most remarkable was an enormous male bear standing directly between the cabin and the approaching security men. His massive form impossibly still, eyes fixed on the humans who had invaded his territory. That's the alpha male of this forest," Jack breathed in wonder. "I've only seen him once before, from a distance. He's been spotted occasionally for years, but avoids humans completely." Outside, the security men had stopped in their tracks, clearly unprepared for the wildlife barrier before them. One reached slowly for his weapon, but the other grabbed his arm, shaking his head urgently. "The animals are protecting us," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe. Mia wriggled free from Olivia's grasp and toddled to the cabin's front door before anyone could stop her. With surprising strength, she pushed against the weathered wood until it creaked open just enough for her tiny form to slip through. "Mia, no!" Olivia cried, lunging after her daughter. But by the time they all rushed to the door, Mia was already standing on the porch steps, facing the astonishing tableau of wildlife and the bewildered security men. The massive alpha bear turned his head toward the child, his posture shifting subtly from threatening to protective. Mia, showing no fear whatsoever, pointed directly at the security men. "No hurt, bear," she declared with absolute conviction that carried clearly across the clearing. "Go away." The security men looked at each other, visibly unnerved by both the child's appearance and the wall of wildlife that seemed to have rallied behind her directive. The smaller man spoke urgently into his wrist communicator, while the larger one took a cautious step backward. Raymond stepped forward, placing himself protectively beside Mia, while carefully avoiding any sudden movements that might startle the assembled animals. "Your boss sent you for this, didn't he?" He held up the USB drive. "Evidence of something much bigger than one injured bear." The scene held in perfect, breathless tension. Security men with hands hovering near weapons, wild animals standing in unnatural alliance, a baby girl whose crayon drawing had somehow catalyzed this extraordinary moment, and adults caught between human conflict and something deeper, more primal, that seemed to be unfolding before them. The standoff was broken by the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Everyone looked up as a news chopper appeared above the tree line, camera clearly pointed down at the stunning tableau below. Almost simultaneously, multiple vehicles could be heard approaching on the service road. the distinctive sirens of state wildlife officers among them. Someone called for backup, Alice realized, looking at Christine with new respect. The attorney smiled slightly. I have the wildlife department on speed dial, and I may have mentioned to a journalist friend that something newsworthy might be happening in these precise GPS coordinates. The security men recognized their untenable position immediately. Whatever their instructions had been, carrying them out under the eyes of news cameras and approaching law enforcement was no longer an option. With visible reluctance, they retreated to their vehicle and departed, tires spinning in the dirt as they accelerated away. As if sensing the danger had passed, the wildlife began to disperse. Deer melting back into the underbrush, birds taking wing, smaller creatures scurrying away. Only the great alpha bear remained, his intelligent eyes fixed on Mia for one more meaningful moment, before he too turned and disappeared into the forest's shadows with surprising grace for a creature of his size. Olivia swept Mia into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Don't ever scare me like that again," she whispered, covering her daughter's face with kisses. Mia patted her mother's wet cheek. "Animals help," she said simply, as if that explained everything. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity around Whispering Pines. The story of the injured mother bear, the baby's drawing, and the extraordinary wildlife gathering had captured national attention, transforming from a local incident into a symbol for environmental awareness. The mother bear, now named Hope by the Rehabilitation Center staff, was making a slow but steady recovery. Her cub, officially named Courage but affectionately called Little Crayon by the center's workers, had adapted well to the temporary separation, comforted by regular supervised visits to his healing mother. Northern Electric had undergone a corporate earthquake. The viral footage of animals seemingly protecting the whistleblowers, combined with the evidence Raymond had provided, had triggered a shareholder revolt. Vincent Hargrove had been forced to resign, and the board had appointed an interim CEO with a strong environmental background. More significantly, the company had announced a comprehensive infrastructure safety program, prioritizing rural areas and wildlife corridors with a specific focus on reducing animal injury risks. Raymond Phillips, far from being professionally destroyed, had been approached by multiple environmental organizations offering him positions. He had declined them all to accept a role as special advisor to the state's newly formed Infrastructure and Wildlife Safety Commission, where his industry experience could directly influence policy. Daniel Wakefield's investigative series had expanded beyond Northern Electric, revealing similar patterns across multiple utility companies nationwide. His work had prompted congressional hearings on infrastructure regulation and environmental impact, with Whispering Pines frequently cited as the catalyst for this new awareness. For Olivia and Mia, life had gradually found a new normal. After the initial media frenzy, Christine had successfully established boundaries that protected their privacy while allowing their story to continue inspiring others. Olivia had been offered a position at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, where her background in early childhood education was being utilized to develop programs teaching children about wildlife conservation. On a warm summer afternoon, 3 weeks after the confrontation at the ranger station, a small gathering assembled at the edge of the forest. The Rehabilitation Center had determined that Hope was finally strong enough to be released back into the wild along with her cub. As the premier sponsor of the bear's recovery, Northern Electric's new management had arranged for the release to happen in a protected section of forest that had been permanently designated as a wildlife sanctuary, the same area where the mother bear had been injured. Present for the occasion were those who had been there from the beginning: Olivia and Mia, Jack, Sarah and her husband, Ellis, Raymond, Christine and Daniel, whose camera was ready to document this happier conclusion to the story he had helped bring to light. A small group of officials was also present, including representatives from the Wildlife Department and the new Northern Electric Management. 2 large transport cages had been carefully positioned at the forest's edge. Inside one, the mother bear paced with restless energy, her coat glossy with returned health, though a distinctive scar pattern remained where the electricity had burned through her fur. In the adjacent cage, her cub watched everything with bright, curious eyes. The Rehabilitation Center director stepped forward, addressing the small gathering. Today marks not just the return of these bears to their home, but a new chapter in how we balance human development with wildlife protection. Thanks to everyone here, and especially to one very special little girl, these bears will return to a forest that's now safer for them and all the creatures who call it home. Mia, dressed in overalls decorated with her own colorful handprints, sat perched on Olivia's hip, watching the proceedings with solemn attention. In her hand, she clutched a new drawing, this one showing brown bears among green trees, with yellow lines safely elevated high above them. "Would you like to do the honors, Mia?" the director asked, holding out the remote control that would simultaneously open both cage doors. With her mother's guidance, Mia pressed the button. The cage doors swung open. For a moment, neither bear moved, cautious after weeks in human care. Then the mother bear emerged, sniffing the familiar air of her forest home. She turned once to look at the assembled humans, her gaze lingering for an inexplicable moment on Mia, before nudging her cub forward. Together, they loped into the trees, disappearing into the dappled shadows of their reclaimed territory. Applause broke out among the humans, a few wiping away tears at the beautiful conclusion to what had begun as tragedy. But Mia wasn't watching the bears anymore. Her attention had shifted to something deeper in the forest, a shadow larger than the others. Only she seemed to notice the massive form of the alpha bear, standing sentinel among the distant trees, witnessing the return of his forest's children. "Bear family all better," Mia declared with satisfaction, patting her mother's cheek to ensure she understood the importance of this moment. Daniel captured one final photograph. Mia pointing toward the forest, the sunlight catching her profile in a golden glow as she shared her vision of harmony between human development and wild spaces. It would become the cover image for his award-winning book, The Crayon Advocate: How a Child's Drawing Changed Corporate America.